Imagine waking up one morning to find that the HOA has set up tents on your land without your permission and is now sending you an outrageous bill for it. It sounds unbelievable, but for John, this was just the beginning of a battle that would shake his peaceful life to its core. What followed was a legal fight filled with shocking twists, corruption, and a fight for justice that no one saw coming. The question is, can one man take down a powerful organization and win? John Thompson had always loved the peace of his little corner of the world. His property, a sprawling patch of land on the outskirts of town, was a sanctuary, a quiet place, where the hum of traffic was a distant memory, and the rustling of trees in the wind was the only sound that mattered. It had taken years of hard work to save up for this piece of earth, and every inch of it felt like a small victory. There was nothing to disturb his calm, nothing to worry about. At least that's what he thought. The Homeowners Association, or HOA as everyone called it, had always been a minor presence in his life. A couple of annual newsletters, a few neighborhood cleanups, and the occasional reminder about property guidelines. The HOA's rules were clear. They ensured the community stayed neat, orderly, and free of disturbances. But John never had an issue with them. He paid his dues, followed the regulations, and kept his distance. The HOA had no reason to get involved in his life. Until today. John pulled his truck into the gravel driveway, his eyes scanning the horizon as he approached the house. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the hills, casting long shadows over the property. But something caught his eye. Something was off. He hit the brakes hard, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as he came to a stop. Tents. There were large white tents, at least 4 of them, set up across his front yard. Big, industrial-looking structures that covered almost a third of the land. They weren't there this morning. John had checked. No one had asked him for permission. No one had informed him. And yet, there they were, flapping in the breeze like unwelcome invaders. He slammed the truck door and stormed toward the tents, his mind racing. What the hell is going on? He hadn't heard anything from the HOA about an event, a project, or any reason for this. No phone calls, no letters. Just these massive white structures, as if they'd been dropped from the sky. His pulse quickened. Is this some sort of mistake? As he got closer, he noticed something else. An official-looking sign posted at the entrance of one of the tents. His breath caught. It was a bill, a statement from the HOA, printed in bold, demanding payment for the installation and maintenance of the tents. The amount? A staggering sum. His mind raced, fighting to process the situation. They can't be serious. This is my property, my land. Suddenly the world around him felt smaller, suffocating. The wind whistled through the trees, but it was no comfort. The HOA had just crossed a line, and John had no idea what their next move would be. All he knew was that this was only the beginning. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. John's pulse still hammered in his chest as he stood frozen, staring at the massive tents that had no business being on his property. His hands clenched into fists, the rough edges of his nails digging into his palms. Every part of him screamed that something was wrong, that this couldn't be happening. He'd worked too hard to let this go unanswered. Did they really think I wouldn't notice? The air felt thicker now, every gust of wind sending the tents fluttering like ghosts in the pale evening light. He scanned the scene for any sign of the workers, anything that could explain this bizarre intrusion. But there was no one. Not a soul in sight. Just as he turned to head back to his truck, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a random message, but his eyes widened when he saw the name on the screen, HOA Office. With a deep, resigned breath, John answered, the voice on the other end sharp and robotic. Mr. Thompson, this is Elaine from the Homeowners Association. We've set up the event tents as part of the upcoming neighborhood event. As agreed upon, the bill for the installation and maintenance is attached. You can review the details at your convenience. John's head spun. Event? What event? He snapped, his voice rising. I never agreed to this. I didn't sign anything. There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end seemed to grow colder. Mr. Thompson, the HOA sent out a notice a month ago about the community gathering. Your signature was requested for approval, but it seems you missed it. We're just making sure everything is ready for the event. John's eyes darted to the bill on the tent, his heart sinking further as he scanned the figures. $2,500? For tents he didn't want. For an event he didn't know about? He could feel the anger bubbling inside him, the injustice of it all settling like a stone in his stomach. You've got to be kidding me, John muttered, his voice barely a whisper, his fingers trembling as they gripped the phone. I don't know anything about this, and I'm not paying for it. Elaine's tone was unfazed, almost robotic. The HOA has already arranged the necessary services. If you fail to settle the amount in the next 30 days, you will face penalties and legal action. I suggest you reconsider your position, Mr. Thompson. Before John could respond, she hung up, the silence of the call settling like a weight on his shoulders. Penalties? Legal action? His blood ran cold. The HOA wasn't just setting up tents, they were playing a dangerous game, and John was in the middle of it. He took a step back, his mind racing. There was something off about all of this. Something more than just a mistake or a misunderstanding. The HOA didn't operate like this, not without a reason. Suddenly the land felt smaller, the tents looming over him like a prison. His breath caught in his throat. What were they really up to? John wasn't one to jump into conflict. He preferred to handle things calmly, to sit down, talk it out, and find a reasonable solution. But this was different. He wasn't just angry. He was starting to feel a creeping sense of helplessness, as if the walls were closing in. The HOA had invaded his life without explanation, and now they were dismissing him as if his concerns didn't matter. He dialed the HOA's office again, his fingers tight around the phone, his knuckles white. His mind raced as he rehearsed what he would say. Polite, firm, but not aggressive. He wasn't looking for a fight, just answers. The call rang for a while before the same voice picked up, still cool and distant. HOA office. How may I assist you? Elaine's tone was as impersonal as ever. It's John Thompson, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm calling about the tents on my property. I never approved any of this. I need to know what's going on. There was a slight pause, and John could practically hear the sigh on the other end. Mr. Thompson, I've already explained this. The event has been scheduled, and the tents were installed as part of that plan. It's not uncommon for the HOA to manage these matters. We've done this for years. John's teeth clenched. I don't care about your past events. This is my property, and I never signed anything. I didn't even get a notice. Elaine's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. As I mentioned before, a notice was sent. Perhaps you missed it? Our records show everything was properly handled. John's pulse quickened. I didn't miss anything. You didn't contact me. You didn't ask for permission. His voice rose slightly, but he forced himself to stay controlled. I want those tents removed, and I want the bill rescinded. I'm not paying for something I didn't authorize. Elaine's response was swift, her tone hardening. Mr. Thompson, we're not in a position to reverse decisions. The event is scheduled. The work has already been done. You can either pay the bill or face the consequences. Your property is part of the community, and we manage these types of things for the greater good. The call was abruptly ended before John could say another word. He stared at the phone in his hand, a bitter taste in his mouth. Consequences? What did that even mean? He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure of whether to jump or climb back down. His mind raced as he thought about his options, but deep down, John knew one thing. They weren't just being stubborn. They were toying with him, manipulating him into a corner. They knew he didn't have the legal expertise to fight back, knew he was just an ordinary guy trying to do the right thing. They were betting on him not being able to stand up to them, and it made him sick. He couldn't let it go. Not now. But how far would the HOA push? And more importantly, what were they hiding behind their cold corporate demeanor? Something told him this wasn't just about tents, it was about power and control. John was in over his head, but he wasn't backing down. Not this time. John sat in his truck, staring at the piece of paper in his hand. The bill from the HOA. The zeros on the page seemed to blur together, a weight that pressed down on his chest. He could feel his heartbeat thumping in his ears, a constant reminder that this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a battle. After the phone call with Elaine, the situation had only grown worse. The HOA's refusal to back down had pushed him to his breaking point. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. This wasn't just a mistake. They were deliberately trying to intimidate him, pushing him into a corner where he had no choice but to comply. But John wasn't the type to back down. Not without a fight. He made the call. "Law Office of Carter and Haynes," came the voice on the other end. "How can I help you?" John explained the situation quickly, outlining the bizarre tents, the hefty bill, and the HOA's refusal to cooperate. He could practically hear the lawyer's brow furrow as he listened. After a long pause, the lawyer spoke. "Mr. Thompson, from what you've described, the HOA may have overstepped their legal boundaries," the lawyer said, his voice measured but intrigued. "They can't just impose these things on your property without proper consent or notification. You have a case." John leaned forward in his seat, adrenaline coursing through him. A case? He'd expected a simple suggestion, some legal mumbo-jumbo about waiting it out. But this? This was a spark of hope. It was the first bit of leverage he'd had in days. "Really?" John's voice betrayed a mix of relief and disbelief. "So what do I need to do?" The lawyer sighed. "Well, first we need to gather all the documentation, the HOA's communications, any proof you have of their overreach, including photos of the tents, the bill, everything. This is going to be a long road, Mr. Thompson. There's going to be paperwork, filings, and more back and forth with the HOA's legal team. You're not going to win this overnight." John's stomach tightened. A long road. He knew that meant months of legal wrangling, endless back and forth, the constant feeling of being dragged through the mud. But there was no way around it now. The fight had begun, and there was no turning back. "How long do you think it will take?" John asked, the question heavy in his throat. The lawyer's response was blunt. "Depends on how far the HOA is willing to push. But make no mistake, this won't be easy. They're a large organization with a lot of resources. If they want to make it difficult for you, they can. And they will." John's mind raced. The HOA wasn't just a neighborly annoyance. They were a machine, and he was David, staring up at Goliath. But something in his gut told him that if he didn't stand up now, he'd never get the chance. "Okay," he said, his voice firm despite the knot in his stomach. "I'm ready. Let's do this." As he hung up the phone, a wave of determination washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by the gnawing realization that he was stepping into something far darker than he had imagined. The HOA wasn't just violating his property. They were playing a game that could ruin him if he wasn't careful. John stared out of his truck window, watching the tents on his property flap in the wind. A sense of unease settled over him. What? Have they been hiding all this time? The answer was just out of reach. But soon John would find out. John spent the next few weeks buried in a mountain of paperwork. The small pile of documents he had started with quickly turned into a sprawling mess filled with legal jargon, case studies, and notes from his lawyer. Each day he felt more like an outsider in a world he'd never wanted to be part of. But there was no turning back now. The stakes had grown higher with every piece of information. John had once believed the HOA was just a collection of well-meaning but overzealous bureaucrats. He was wrong. They were a powerful entity with deep roots, and they weren't used to being challenged. He had learned about land rights, zoning laws, and the fine print in his neighborhood's covenant, each lesson more unsettling than the last. The HOA had a lot of power, more than he'd ever imagined. They could dictate what could and couldn't be done on his land, but only under certain conditions. And those conditions hadn't been met. It was becoming clear that they'd violated the very rights they were supposed to protect. But the more John researched, the more he unearthed. There were whispers, too, rumors in the community about things the HOA had done in the past, things that had been swept under the rug. He wasn't the first person to face their overreach. In fact, he was only the most recent target. Stories from other homeowners surfaced about forced renovations, hidden fees, and properties that had been taken over without consent. The deeper John dug, the more disturbing it became. He discovered that, for years, the HOA had been quietly fining residents for trivial reasons, manipulating property values, and even colluding with local businesses to ensure their financial gain. And now, with John's case, they were clearly trying to extend their control even further, testing the waters to see how far they could go before someone stood up to them. He clicked through a digital file, his eyes narrowing as he found the smoking gun, a letter from a former HOA board member who had been booted after raising concerns about these practices. The letter outlined specific instances of corruption, illegal dealings, and hidden agendas. The HOA hadn't just crossed a line with John. They'd crossed every line. John's stomach churned as he read through the details. If what he was seeing was true, the HOA wasn't just a minor inconvenience. They were a criminal organization operating under the guise of neighborhood protection, and he had the evidence to prove it. As the days dragged on, John's determination grew. But so did the fear gnawing at him. He had always considered his fight to be about the tents, the bill, the intrusion. But now, it was about much more. It was about taking down an institution that had held too much power for too long. The thought of court was overwhelming. The HOA had endless resources, and they were known for dragging cases out, burying their opponents in paperwork and legal fees. They could bury him. But if he didn't fight, if he let them win, what kind of man would he be? He gritted his teeth and shoved the stack of papers aside. The battle was no longer about defending his property. It was about justice. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. John took a deep breath. He had to win. For his land. For his neighborhood. And for anyone else who had been crushed under the weight of the HOA's silent rule. The courtroom loomed on the horizon, but John wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready. The real fight was just beginning. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension as John sat in the front row, his heart pounding in his chest. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, peered down at the lawyers on either side of the room. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first move in the battle between the little guy and the giant that was the HOA. John's lawyer, a calm and collected woman named Grace Carter, stood confidently, her gaze unwavering. She was a fighter, and it was clear she believed in the case. The moment she opened her mouth, the entire room seemed to lean in. "Your Honor," Grace began, her voice steady and precise, "the case we are presenting is simple. The HOA, an organization that is meant to manage the shared interests of this community, has taken illegal and unauthorized actions against my client, Mr. John Thompson. They invaded his property, set up tents without his permission, and then billed him for their so-called services." John's pulse quickened. The words invaded and unauthorized cut through the air like a knife. He hadn't fully realized just how much he had been wronged until he heard it like that, formally stated. Official. His chest swelled with a mix of anger and determination. Grace continued, laying out the details with precision, outlining how the HOA had violated his rights by setting up the tents without consent, misusing community funds for their own benefit, and most importantly, attempting to manipulate and intimidate John into paying for something that was never authorized. She backed every claim with hard evidence: emails, photos of the tents on his land, the bill, the shady letter from the former board member. She even had a legal expert ready to testify about HOA overreach and land rights. John felt a glimmer of hope. This was it. This was his chance to take down the HOA and show them that no one, not even an organization like them, was above the law. But then the opposing lawyer stood. The man was sharp-suited, his hair slicked back, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. John recognized him immediately. This was the kind of man who made his living twisting the truth, turning every situation into a game of who could outsmart whom. "Your Honor," the HOA's lawyer said, his voice smooth and almost charming, "what we have here is a simple misunderstanding. Mr. Thompson's property, as outlined in the neighborhood's bylaws, is subject to community agreements. These tents were set up as part of a necessary neighborhood event, one that benefits all residents. Mr. Thompson is simply being unreasonable in refusing to pay for the maintenance and setup that was agreed upon by the community." The words "necessary neighborhood event" hit John like a slap in the face. He leaned forward, his fists clenched, trying to swallow the anger rising in his throat. They were twisting the narrative, making him sound like the villain for not accepting something that had been imposed on him without his knowledge. The tension in the room was palpable, like a live wire waiting to snap. Grace shot back, "Your Honor, there was no community agreement, no formal notice, no signature from Mr. Thompson authorizing any of this. The HOA's claim is baseless. They overstepped their authority, plain and simple." The judge's eyes flickered between the two lawyers, her expression unreadable. She had heard it all before: the lies, the half-truths, the tactics to spin the story. But John could see something in her eyes now, a flicker of doubt. Was she starting to see through the HOA's web of manipulation? But just as the courtroom held its collective breath, the HOA's lawyer delivered his final blow. "If Mr. Thompson truly believes he was wronged," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "why has he waited until now to contest it? Why didn't he bring this up earlier when the tents were first set up, when the event was announced?" John's stomach twisted. He hadn't known. He hadn't been informed. He hadn't been given the chance. His silence had been his only defense, and now it was being used against him. The judge tapped her gavel, signaling for a break, but not before locking eyes with John. A sharp chill ran down his spine. The battle wasn't over yet, and with each passing moment, the tension was building. Something was about to break. The courtroom felt suffocating, a thick fog of doubt hanging over John as the hours stretched on. His heart beat wildly in his chest, each tick of the clock amplifying the pressure. The HOA's lawyer had made his case with precision, and despite John's lawyer, Grace, doing her best to counter every move, the momentum seemed to shift in favor of the HOA. The judge's unreadable expression only added to the growing sense of despair. John sat at the edge of his seat, his hands clenched into fists. It felt like everything he'd worked for, everything he believed in, was slowly slipping away. The HOA was a machine, and no one had ever stood up to it. Not like this. His thoughts raced. How could they be this powerful? How could they just trample on the rights of so many people without any consequences? He could almost feel the weight of defeat pressing down on him. But then, just when it seemed like the case was about to come to a close in the HOA's favor, something shifted. Grace stood up suddenly, her expression fierce as she turned toward the judge. There was an unexpected confidence in her step, a light in her eyes that John hadn't seen before. "Your Honor," Grace said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I have just been handed some new evidence that may change the entire direction of this case." The room went silent. Everyone turned toward her, curiosity and skepticism written on their faces. John's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment that could make or break everything. Grace's gaze flickered to John, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he saw hope in her eyes. She held up a thick file filled with documents and photos, and she spoke with a calm assurance that sent a ripple of uncertainty through the room. "Over the course of the last few days, my team has uncovered several irregularities in the HOAs, financial records, hidden fees, misappropriation of funds, and most shockingly, evidence of a deliberate cover-up involving some of the HOA's biggest figures." John's mind spun. He had known the HOA was hiding something, but this was far worse than he'd imagined. His heart pounded as he tried to process the implications. The tents, the bill, it wasn't just about that. It was about something far more sinister. Grace continued, her voice rising with every word. "We've also spoken to several former members of the HOA who've come forward with information regarding illegal activities taking place behind the scenes. This isn't just a dispute over property rights. This is about corruption. And Mr. Thompson, as the victim in this case, is being used as a pawn in their scheme to cover it all up." John felt the blood drain from his face. His instincts had been right all along. The HOA hadn't just invaded his property. They were trying to bury something bigger, something that could bring them all down. And now, they had underestimated him. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. The judge, clearly caught off guard, motioned for silence, her eyes darting back and forth between Grace and the opposing lawyer, who now looked like a man caught in a trap. The HOA's lawyer shot up, his face pale as he attempted to regain control. "Objection, Your Honor? This is irrelevant. This has nothing to do with the case at hand." But the damage had already been done. The judge's gavel slammed down, signaling the end of the argument. "The new evidence will be reviewed. This case is far from over." John's pulse raced. This was it. The tables had turned. As the courtroom buzzed with the news of the twist, John's mind raced. He wasn't just fighting for his property anymore. He was fighting for justice. Not just for himself, but for the dozens of other homeowners who had suffered at the hands of the HOA. The truth was out there, and now he had the power to expose it. As he locked eyes with Grace, a silent promise passed between them. They were going to win this. They were going to take down the HOA. And when the dust settled, the truth would shine through. The battle was far from over, but now, for the first time, John felt like the victor. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel came down with a resounding thud, the sound reverberating in John's chest like a heartbeat. His palms were clammy, his body rigid with anticipation. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, holding everyone in suspense. And then, the words came. "After careful consideration of the evidence presented, I hereby rule in favor of Mr. John Thompson. The HOA's actions were not only unauthorized, but also an abuse of power. The bill for the tents is to be dropped, and further legal actions will be taken against the HOA for their financial misconduct and illegal practices." John's breath caught in his throat. The weight of the words took a moment to settle in, but when they did, a wave of relief rushed over him. He had won. Not just the case, but the fight for his property, his rights, and, in a way, the fight for everyone who had been silenced by the HOA's overreach. The opposing lawyer's face was a mask of disbelief, his expression pale and crumpled. As he fumbled with his notes, clearly unable to comprehend the turn of events, the judge continued, her voice firm. "The HOA is also to issue a public apology for their actions and pay full compensation to Mr. Thompson for any damages incurred. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into their financial practices. The court finds that their misuse of funds and manipulation of community agreements will not go unchecked. John's mind was spinning, the gravity of the victory sinking in. Not only had the HOA lost the case, but they were now being forced into a full public reckoning. The apology, the compensation. It was everything he could have hoped for and more. As the judge dismissed the court, a sense of finality washed over him. His lawyer, Grace, gave him a knowing smile as she passed by, her face a mixture of satisfaction and relief. "You did it," she said, her voice low but filled with respect. John didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. His mind was still processing, still adjusting to the sudden shift in his life. He glanced around the room, seeing the stunned expressions of the HOA's legal team, the defeat in their eyes. This is what victory looks like, he thought, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, John stood for a moment, his eyes squinting against the bright sunlight as the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. It felt surreal, like he had just walked through a storm and emerged on the other side. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his friend Sam. "Heard the news. You did it. The HOA is done." John smiled, his chest swelling with pride. He had taken on the giant and won, not because he was the strongest or the most powerful, but because he stood his ground, armed with the truth. This was worth every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. As he made his way down the courthouse steps, he felt a new sense of empowerment. It wasn't just the victory over the HOA. It was the realization that standing up for what's right, no matter how daunting, could change everything. He had won this battle, but more than that, he had reclaimed his life, his property, and his voice. And that was something no one could ever take from him. John took a deep breath, the weight of the past few weeks finally lifting. This fight was over, but in its wake, he had become someone different, someone who knew what it meant to fight for justice, and ultimately, to win. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.